So I want you to imagine that after today's session, you go out of the building and across the square, and up ahead, you see a crowd of people. And you see a crowd and you wonder what they're doing, and then you see that there's a person high up on a building, on a roof. Maybe they're threatening to jump. And now you're not just you. Your job today is a crisis negotiator, and you've got to join that scene. You're not the first on the scene, you've got to join that scene and start talking to try and engage the person on the roof. And my question is, what are you going to say first? How are you actually going to formulate breaths, words, intonation, pace? What are you going to do? That's one of the things we're going to look at today, and connect the kinds of things that crisis negotiators do with sales, and try to see those points of connection where words change outcomes. So this is what I do. I'm a conversation analyst. I'm a psychologist by background, but I study real conversation as it happens in the wild. So psychologists typically look at encounters by thinking, let's put people into a laboratory and get them to do stuff there, and then we extrapolate to the real world. Or we'll get people to simulate or role play, or we will interview people or ask them on a survey later, what did you do that worked? That's not what I do. I want to study people in the moments where they're saying things that matter, as they say them. This incredibly rich thing that is right under our noses. We've been doing it all our lives. It's quite easy to capture and study. It's not studied very much, and it's conversation. So I study recording, sometimes single cases, tens, hundreds, thousands of cases of interaction. I transcribe them in a lot of fine-grained detail, which you're going to see in a minute, and then set about understanding the entire encounter from the moment it starts to the moment it ends. And so I quite often think about conversation as having an architecture to it. So you can think about a roadway, a racetrack, a golf course, but anything that's got a kind of structure to it, where you move along it, you move through it, turn by turn with the people that you're interacting with, and you complete projects. So you start with openings, then you maybe explain why we're having the conversation today, and then maybe someone's going to start asking you some questions. Think about a medical encounter where you open with the doctor and you do the greetings, and then you do the "this is why I'm here," and then the doctor might start to ask you some diagnostic questions, and then you might move into the next project, which might be some recommendations, some advice, some next treatment, and then the closing. So conversations are so interesting in the tiniest detail, but also kind of in aggregate at scale. And it's remarkable how in my field of conversation analysis, you see some fascinatingly universal things about the machinery that drives our everyday conversations. And that's what I'm interested in showing you a little bit of today. And so it's not just, if we take something like cultural difference, or all the things that we imagine are very different in the way people interact with each other. From a conversation analyst point of view, we see that people complete any project in different ways, but they are still going to do the project. So if it's a greeting, greetings happen universally around the world. We might have a different language for doing it. Sometimes we do it with just gesture or just even gaze or whatever it might be. We're going to do the projects. And so one of the things that I do when I'm studying these multiple examples of encounters is think, right, I'm looking at a doctor-patient encounter. I want to look at the way the doctor perhaps makes a recommendation for treatment. And I want to see that that project pretty much always happens in this particular medical sort of situation. But not all doctors do that in the same way. So they're all doing the project, but they might be doing it a little bit differently. And so one of the things that we can zoom in on is finding out, like, okay, so how did the doctor make the recommendation? And then we can track forward to, did the patient agree in the encounter, in the consultation, to sort of adhere to the recommendation, and then later on, were there outcomes for their health? So let's think about that scene in the square outside and where you might start as a crisis negotiator. So I'm going to play you. You're going to hear real calls. This is with this project that I finished a few years ago, working with the Metropolitan Police, who make recordings live at the scene. So this wasn't set up for research. They asked me to come and look at these, analyze these encounters with a view to sort of augmenting the training that they have for their crisis negotiators. And so you're going to hear real recordings, but they're all anonymized, of course. So the voices will always sound a little bit strange because I've altered the pitch. And the first word that you won't hear, but is the first thing that the negotiator says in this little extract is Keith. It's not the real name of the person, but you're not going to hear that because I've taken that out. But the negotiator is going to say, Keith, don't ignore me. And in a way, kind of quite connected back to the fun bus thing, but you're going to see a negotiator do something you think, whoa, surely you would never write that down and recommend it as a strategy. But we're going to see something kind of interesting in a negotiation. So you'll hear the audio come out, hopefully, in sync with the transcript. And the transcript has got sort of, think about music notation. Any of you who are musical and know how to read music, it's a universal system. It lets us sort of understand. If you can read music, you can probably hear it in your head. And if you can hear music and you know how to use the notation system, you can then note it down and sort of construct manuscripts. It's a bit like that. There's a technical way that we transcribe. And that's because we're interested in not just the words, of course, that people say, but words are placed with timing, with ums and ahs and breaths and lip smacks and all these things. And they're not detail that are extraneous. I'm not adding anything into this. I'm trying to show you this is what people use. We're doing it all the time. So let's really be granular about what people are doing when they interact with each other, because we are granular. We're not. So let's see this detail. So you'll see this detail. I'll point out some things about it as we go through. But first line, first word, the negotiator says, Keith, but you won't hear that.
Don't ignore me. Coming on to me.
And there's a big silence.
I'm starting to get a bit fed up now. I am really sorry. Why are you laughing? You're trying to fucking fix it. Why are you then?
So you can't really imagine a training, where you haven't seen real recordings, where you might say something like, say to the person in crisis on the roof who might jump, say that you're really annoyed that maybe they're ignoring you. You're like, surely no one can really say this and it actually be part of an effective communication strategy with the person in crisis. And then little details that we'll start to point out, things like we see the little laughter here from the person in crisis. Wow, didn't expect to see in the most poignant moment potentially of somebody's life that the person in crisis might actually laugh in an affiliative way with the crisis negotiator. And here, when you see a pound sign, which we're going to come on to in a minute, this is smiley voice. So you can hear that they're sort of saying, I'm sorry about that, with a smile in their voice. And all sorts of details. And then here at 15, I'm not trying to fucking piss you off. Like, you don't really imagine that these are the kinds of conversations that might happen when somebody could jump. But actually they are there, and we need to understand how it is that you can come to say and have this kind of encounter in a way that we just don't expect. We're going to come back to this one at the end. I'm going to take you through a series of other cases where we see things not working so well, and then we'll see how people find their way to effective conversations with safe outcomes and other sorts of happy outcomes. So let's just think about the crisis negotiation again, and where you start. And what is the purpose of crisis negotiation? I just want to play you just 10 seconds from this video from NYPD, who work very collaboratively with the Met Police in this international community of crisis negotiators, just sort of articulating this is the purpose of crisis negotiation.
Motto of the hostage negotiation team is talk to me. Talk to me means we're willing to listen to you. We're here to help.
Okay, just 2 words in there that I want you to keep in your mind as we go through these examples. Talk and help. Why would you not think that crisis negotiation is all about talking and helping? Let's have a look at a negotiator sort of now embodying this. As we've seen the purpose as articulated. Now let's see what it actually looks like in the wild. And just to sort of say one thing which is so amazing really about the work of the crisis negotiators, and just anybody, actually any of us having any conversation ever, is the pace at which it's going. So it's all very well to reflect here now with eons of time, what you might say. But actually, talk bounces along with an average of 200 milliseconds between the turns that we take. So anything longer than that means something. We start to, it's a signal to interpret, actually. But the fact is, these negotiators don't have a long time to develop a strategy. They might have a millisecond, and that's it. They have to say something now. You can't wait. So just bear that in mind. So here is a negotiator sort of embodying the strategy of talk and help, trying to build a relationship with the person in crisis. So do you want to talk to me for a bit? I am going to try and help you with all of the stumbles and things that are just part of the way we talk. And that's quite a long silence, actually, in conversation. And there isn't anything audible coming back from the person in crisis. Okay, so express care. We're worried. We have these sort of emotional feelings for you. And that's it. So we've got this sequence where the negotiator starts, do you want to talk to me for a bit? I'm going to try and help. And where we end up is the phone goes down. Now, the negotiator can't give up. They have to try again. And so one of the things that is, again, sort of part of the method that I use to think about how to analyze these conversations is we have a natural laboratory here, because the negotiator is going to try again, and they are going to start to feel their way to an effective strategy. Their experience, their expertise will be something that we can sort of point a finger on and point a pin on and identify. But at this point, what we can see is that, do you want to talk to me, in the end isn't going to get you very far. And expressing concern and worry is perhaps also not going to be the strategy to use, even though, of course, it sounds like exactly the kind of thing that you should say, build a relationship. I'm here to talk. I'm here to help. I'm concerned. I'm worried. I care. What's so surprising is we found that these were not things that engaged a person in crisis. Here's another example. So here's the negotiator again asking, can we talk about how you are? And even, maybe not knowing very much about the sort of the science behind all this stuff, even 700 milliseconds is quite long. Already we can predict that it's not going to be a yes type response, because they tend to be faster than resistant type responses. So we see there's probably going to be some resistance. And this is what happens next. So this was one of the first clips that we looked at, where myself and my researcher on the project just noticed that when negotiators asked to talk to people in crisis, people resisted talking. And you would often get this, phone goes down. That's really strange. And then even things like, if you just see the first question, can we talk about how you are? Playing this back to negotiators and not showing them what happens next. Quite often they'll anticipate resistance, but they might say, they'll probably say something like, I don't want to talk about how I am, focusing on the how are you bit of the question rather than the verb talk itself. But you could hear in the way the person in crisis responded, even through the anonymization, that they said, no, I don't want to talk. And they dispensed with the how are you bit. That wasn't in their head. It was the I don't want to talk. And, why is it that people say things like, I don't want to talk? But we found when we went through all of the instances across our hours of recordings that when dialogue was proposed with the verb to talk, it got resistance. And people would also say things like, what's the point in talking? Talking doesn't do anything. It's not doing anything. And they had that sort of idiomatic way to just resist that we all have, that talk isn't really doing anything, it's just talk. And people in crisis leverage that idiom, and it slots in right there, and then we have to try again. What's this got to do with sales? We're going to look at another early point in a conversation right at the start now of two sales conversations, business to business. The goal of the conversation is have a conversation, try to get this prospective client who isn't the client and we've never spoken before to agree at the end that we'll have an appointment so that I can come and show you my wares. And in this particular case, technology wares. So let's have a look at one. This time the prospective client's going to pick up the phone and say, hello, I've anonymized them as Max speaking, how can I help? And then the salesperson's going to say something.
Hello, Speaking, how can I help? Oh, how are you doing this morning?
Okay. And the pound signs, remember, how are you doing this morning? So it's got that how are you quality to it that we sort of saw in the crisis negotiation as a thing to sort of kick off a conversation. And then nothing happens immediately, and then we get, okay, so the callers come back with good thanks, and then we're interested, we're going to stop it here and come back to this later. So these how are yous, which we think, oh, they're just pointless things that, you know, it's just like filler talk at the start of a conversation. They're actually endlessly fascinating to see where are they reciprocated? Where do you get, how are you fine? How are you fine? It's apparently doing nothing, but in fact, it's doing quite a lot of work to tell you about what sort of encounter we're in, what sort of relationship we have, how reciprocal our rapport is. Let's have a look at another one. Different call.
Hello, again. Oh, hello, Dave. Is that me? Oh, hi. We're here from Martin. How are you? Oh, fine, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just bringing you to the same point, right? In the same two different conversations, but we get to the same point. We've got the, are we speaking to the right, probably the right person? And then the salesperson, how are you doing this morning in one? And then in this one, how are you? You could hear it in the way he said, you. And then we get a response. Because here, of course, you know, it's not really the issue that the person isn't going to talk. But are they going to talk back? Are they going to actually keep taking turns? Because the same thing applies, really. You want them to keep taking turns so that you move through the encounter productively. So we'll come back here in a minute, see what happens next in both cases. So why is it? Because of course what I'm building up to are things that don't work, things that people do a lot, but they don't actually work. And why is that? Given that we also see people with their expertise doing things that work all the time. So what is it about communication? I'm like, you know, obviously as a scientist of communication, it's really a strange field to be in a way, because everyone has their whole lifetime's anecdata about how we talk to each other, because we've all done it forever. It's not like being a physicist and, you know, most people don't know the intricate details of, you know, the physics of black holes. So it would be a somewhat easier gig somehow. But communication is one of those really weird things, which is super important right up until the moment that we actually look at people actually talking to each other. And it's hardly ever something that people really do. And instead, we, you know, rely on things like this, my most also favorite and also least favorite pie chart, which is, and you've probably seen something like it, that, you know, communication is 93% body language, 7% words. If you're taking a photo to share this, I'm going to diss it big time in a minute. Because of course this pie chart you know, emerges from research by somebody called Albert Morabian in the 60s and then the 80s, and it's super common finding that people will just trot out about communication. But of course it doesn't really make any sense at all. Because if communication was only 7% verbal and the rest was body language or intonation, how is it that when I'm in France, it's not fine 93% of the time? I don't really speak very good French. Or how come the Samaritans on the phone do amazing work on the phone? Why do we listen to the radio? How can we talk in the dark? It doesn't make sense, but we do love a stat and a pie chart. You may or may not know, though, that Morabian, who conducted the research where this stat emerged from, didn't really find the thing that people took from it, and has spent, you know, a decent chunk of his career since trying to get people to stop using this finding in the wrong way. So next time you see that slide, you can say, I remember I was in this talk, take a photograph of this slide. And then, you know, but this is so fascinating. Of course, you know, it's one of those frustrating things about being an academic, where like, it's not really what people are finding. And so what I really like to imagine is a world where the way we talk about talk is based on science and not anecdata and not spurious pie charts. And so this is what I've been trying to do, you know, for all of my the applied side of my work, which is to identify, describe, and share what people are doing. So my job isn't to come along and say, I think you should talk like this. My job is to come along and say, this is what experts and experienced people are doing when they do it well. Back to the question, you know, that we were saying before, you know, how do you know what's good? And people can't tell you. Some people can tell you because we can analyze it and show you. So let's go back to the salespeople. We're going to come back up now, having seen things not working so well, we're going to come back up to things that work. So we're at this point in these two sales conversations, and what you've seen is the initiation of a how are you. And it's pretty hard, given that how automatic and pointless, how are you fine, you think, but it's almost automatic that someone would say that back to you. So we've had salesperson, how are you doing? Good, thanks. Really now, the caller should say, how are you back? Because it's just automatic and it doesn't really mean anything, right? Okay, that isn't what happens though.
Oops.
Not too bad. Suppose it's Christmas in the distant memory.
So salesperson hasn't been asked, how are you? But they've kind of treated it as if they have. And now they're going into small talk. And what is the, in a way, like whatever we think about all of this, we could ask ourselves, well, what is the caller, what the called person, what are they making of all of this?
Yeah.
That's what they make of it.
So now, third week in January, the first Christmas period, lots of Christmas for
Okay, now on the right, we've seen, okay, this isn't really working. My number one message back to the company was stop building rapport. But of course, I don't really mean stop building rapport, but what I do mean is really listen. Like, does this person want to do small talk with you? And the answer is no. Now, on this side, we're at the same point, and we should, if this how are you fine was going to be reciprocated, that's what should happen next. Is the salesperson listening on the right-hand side?
Just that we spoke back in October.
And they go on. Because they don't get the how are you back quickly. And so on the left-hand side, we have a call that is not going to end up with an appointment. And on the right-hand side, we have one that is going to end up with an appointment. And by identifying these small things and having them like taken out of the conversation, other things put into the conversation based on what we could see people putting in and taking out, we were able to do some really good work. In this case, it was with Toshiba and improve their conversion rates. Okay. Couple more examples before we finish and come back to that crisis negotiation. So I'm going to show you now a call from the end. So thinking about where we are in a conversation. This is towards the end of the conversation between a community mediator and a person with a neighbour dispute. People with neighbour disputes don't typically know about or really want mediation. They want their neighbour evicted, arrested, in court. And so they phone the mediation centre and say, I've just phoned the council and they've given me your number. And then the mediators have to explain what mediation is at some point. And I got really interested in this because mediators, some of them are really good at explaining mediation and getting people to agree to mediate, getting those people to become their clients. And some are just not very good at it. They're just not very good at getting people to say yes to mediation as the possible solution to their mediation dispute. But in this call, I want to show you something which I just think is magical, and magical for me to be able to identify and pinpoint this moment of amazing expertise from a mediator. So they've explained what mediation is, and now they're asking this client, potential client, this question.
Does that sound like it might be helpful to you?
It being mediation that I've just explained. 0.7 of a second, you already know what that means, right? It means probably a no is coming up. And so this is what a no can look like. We don't always say yes or no, but this is the caller saying, it might be, but I'm not really sure about even seeing this girl at all at this stage, this neighbour.
It might be, but I'm not too sure at this stage about, how long you've seen this girl for.
Now, at this point in the conversation, it goes one of two ways. Some mediators at this point will just say, yeah, all right then, well, look, if you change your mind, I'll send you the leaflet, and that's the end. But in this case, the mediator is going to try again. And I just want you to watch for the point where the caller starts to talk in response to what the mediator says next, because it's really important to notice what you might think of normatively as an interruption, but this overlap, because it tells you a lot. So let's see what happens next.
You'd be willing to speak to her definitely.
So we have, you'd be willing to see two of our and that's when the person starts to say, oh, of course, yeah, definitely. And what we found was that when mediators propose that someone is willing, especially after resistance, you always get an agreement to mediate. So you can ask people, would they like to mediate? They might say yes. You can ask them, would it be helpful? They might say yes. But if you ask them if they're willing to do it, they always say yes. And it's amazing, and it works really because they've spent a long time telling you this is the kind of person that the other person won't mediate. The other person's horrible. They're the kind of person that won't mediate, but you must be then the kind of person who will. And that's kind of why it works. So we see this "are you willing" after resistance working basically in every case that we've got. It's kind of magic. It's not there all the time though, because not everyone is doing it. And so on the basis of this work and other work looking at what works inside these mediation calls, I then went on to work with the Ministry of Justice, ACAS, and lots of mediators to just try and find out from the amazing work that a lot of mediators are actually doing to engage clients and just feed that in to all sorts of campaigns. And did also some work in the tech industry with Typeform, a conversational data collection platform, where we were also looking at what is it that we can just build into the platform that makes our clients get to the end of the form more effectively. Okay, so let's finish with what works better than talk to get people talking in crisis negotiation. And again, it is amazing to see that you can find out something that makes a difference here. And again, a bit like we just had, I want you to notice the point at which the person in crisis starts to respond to this other way of getting engagement in the crisis negotiation. So here is a negotiator proposing dialogue, but not using the word talk.
I want to come down and speak to you.
And just after speak, so the brackets there mean, the person in crisis just starts talking after they've heard the verb to speak. And then we might ask ourselves, do people in crisis ask to talk to somebody? So like, what's their preferred verb when they are actually on a building? What do they ask for? It's speak. So again, as we went through all of our recordings, we found that when negotiators propose to speak to a person in crisis, they get traction. When they propose to talk to a person in crisis, they get resistance. I mean, it's amazing. But it's what people are doing. It's just that it's not written down anywhere. So people aren't learning that from the start. And now let's go back to the very first extract that I showed you, where we got, don't ignore me. You're really starting to annoy me now. Let's see where that ends up. And then there's a big long silence. All these things like, whoa, you can't really say this.
What's your step, mate? What's your step?
He's coming down safely now. And I just want you to note that we've got the will in there as well, which is, the same verb. Will you come down? So again, the impact on the training of this research, super poignant, and to be able to share back to the negotiators, this is what you do that works. It's not written down anywhere in your institution, but now it is. I thought I'd leave you in the last minute, because it's festive and it's nearly Christmas, with how to get kids to be less selfish at Christmas. I'd love to say this was my work, but it isn't. But it is something super interesting about the difference a word makes. So it's on YouTube, you can find it. So go and Google the behavioral science guys. And so what they did was basically send the stripy pink kid goes to Father Christmas with her list of, they all know what they want. And they go along with the kid in the purple stripy top, who kind of knows that they're in league with the experiment, they know what's going on. And Father Christmas says, what would you like to get for Christmas? Kids have got their lists, haven't they? And they trot them all out. What do you want to get for Christmas? And then the two of them go over, so pink stripy and purple stripy go over to Santa's little helper to get their present that they all get. And they're offered the little or the large gold lint teddy. And pink stripy top, who's just been talking about what she wants to get for Christmas, picks the big one, leaving the little one for purple stripy top. But in the second arm of the experiment, the kids are told to ask, what do you want to buy Santa? They're told to ask Santa, ask them, what do you want to give for Christmas? And you should go and Google it and watch it, because the kids, you can see them going, what do I want to give for Christmas? But Santa persists, and eventually, you know, the kids get on board, and I want to give love to my mom. It's quite cute. But what is very interesting, and of course now probably quite predictable, is that in that second part of the experiment, experimental kid is more likely to offer the large teddy to Purple Stripey than take it for themselves. So words matter a lot. The words you choose to frame a problem or do anything are going to powerfully influence the way you're feeling about it, but also the outcome of that conversation. And so I just leave you with that thought that this event is about the art and science of sales language. And people often ask me, is communication an art or is it a science? And I think really, for me, conversation and communication is an art, but you need the science to describe it accurately, and then we can all learn that together. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Well, I'm sure we'll have some questions from the audience on that. Sorry, we need the mic. The lady over here.
Shona Harris from NTT Data. So you thoroughly dissed the Mehrabian pie chart that I think we've probably all seen on training courses.
Yeah.
So now I'm really curious to know what you think about that other really famously well-trotted out quote that people never remember what you say, they always remember how you made them feel. What's your view on that one?
I think I probably have, I would support that a bit more, because what we know is that when you ask people what they said, their memory may or may not be very good for a whole bunch of reasons. You know, people, when they're reporting things they said, are not generally using their memory like a video player. That's not how it works anyway. When you ask people anything, they've got some stake in telling you about that, not somebody else about that, whatever it was. So, you know, for all sorts of reasons, when you ask people what they said, it's not going to be reliable. Whereas that sense of, you know, I felt really X in that situation, yeah, I think that's a bit different actually. But what I also, you know, when I look at some data and start looking at it with students sometimes as well, I actually say, you know, what do you feel about this? Actually, how does it make you feel? But then we sort of want to go past that and say, okay, well, what is it actually, like literally breath, by word, by intonation, by detail, that we think is giving you that? But that might be sometimes the first way in, like, what's going on here? How does it make you feel? And after that, though, we want to be really specific about what's actually making that sort of feeling happen, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you. And that was a really fascinating speech, by the way. I really enjoyed that.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
First of all, thank you very much, because that was a really, really useful session. I'm really interested in stuff like this, human psychology and the likes. I've got two questions, but I'm only going to ask one. What do you think the level of importance is for using silence in questioning and communicating? Because a lot of this was based on, you know, 0.2 seconds to respond, 0.7. What level of impact do you think this plays, particularly when interacting with clients? Because as salespeople, we often find that we're told to use silence appropriately. What level of influence do you think that has on a customer? And do you think that improves their willingness, if I was to use that word, to respond and engage with us?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, because silence, well, first thing, silence is never really silence, because silence is not nothing. It's not inert. We don't like switch off for 2 seconds and then we're back on kind of thing. It's not a nothing thing. So silence, first of all, has to be almost like actively produced and maintained, and it's quite hard to maintain a long silence. So some of those examples that you saw, you know, I think the longest one was 7 seconds or something. I think the longest one I've ever recorded was 11.2 in a police interview, where the suspect just really didn't want to answer the question, so they waited for 11.2 seconds, and then a different version of the question came out. But so I think there's lots and lots of research in my field on what silence is doing, and the first thing to think about is it really silence, or are people actually sort of filling it with or gaze, or looking, or think, or showing that they're doing things in apparently that silence. So I think a lot of what we imagine is happening in a silence isn't really what's going on in a silence. Long silences start actually measurably much shorter than we think. So 2 seconds is huge. 4 seconds is excruciating. Just one very quick story. I actually gave a talk a few years ago, and Charlie State, the BBC journalist, was the host. And I did something a bit like this, and then he said that he asked a very similar question to you, and said he'd interviewed Lady Gaga. You can go and YouTube this as well. And he asked her a question about Trump. It was 2016, I think this was, and she just stayed silent. And he said that the silence was so excruciating that when the BBC broadcast the version of the interview, they actually chopped 8 seconds of it out because it was so long that they thought we just can't put viewers through it, which I thought was actually kind of fascinating. So yeah, silence is very powerful, but it's doing a whole bunch of different things. And I suppose I would just say, send me your email and I'll send you some stuff.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hi there, Ryan O'Sullivan from Intro Hive. So I think it's really fascinating when you uncover the words that are very similar, but they have a different impact.
Yeah.
And that's the output, I guess. But considering how quickly people need to respond, how difficult is it to retrain people to use those words in those types of scenarios? And it seems like it would be very tough to.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is, sometimes I think you can't, because it depends on, so when I talked about that landscape and that overall structure of a conversation, there are things where it's so in flight and you just can't get there fast enough. But there are interventions that we made that sort of were the things that had the impact in the training, for example, that did make a difference. So mediators explaining mediation to people aren't born knowing how to do that. So you can deliver that package information and comprise it of different words. That's quite an easy change. Like, don't say mediation is this and this and this. Say it's that and that and that, because that's going to get you there. And that's a fairly easy fix. It was also not a fairly easy fix, but it was one of the things that the negotiators reported back, because we basically showed that talk and help are both verbs that don't get engagement, whereas speak and sort get you further faster. And so they reported that when they started to try and put that at the start of their negotiations, where you're getting a lot of resistance and the negotiator's doing most of the talking, so you actually have a bit more control and a bit more time to think, it's effective there. And then the other place, which might surprise you, where it can be quite effective is in negotiation, and actually just in any supervision. Like, in negotiation, there's a secondary negotiator sometimes suggesting things for the primary to say. And sometimes we did quite a lot of work on what does the secondary do? Do they, because they're kind of live analysing, they don't have to say anything, but they might be suggesting things. And the question is, do they suggest sensible things? And the answer is not always, but they're very trainable. So those are the things that you can sort of feed into that version of the training as well. So I think the answer is some things you can change quite easily, some things are quite hard.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think sadly that's all we have time for.
Yeah.
Can we give Liz a round of applause? Okay, thank you so much.